I was not supposed to survive the fall. That is what they told me afterward, the groom who found me at the base of the escarpment, the two farmhands who carried me on a gate plank through the mud, the surgeon from Ashwick who came and went in a single gray afternoon, shaking his head as he buckled his bag. 3 broken ribs, one of them badly set from a campaign wound that had never healed cleanly. A shoulder wrenched from its socket. A gash along the left side of my face from the stone ledge I had struck on the way down, and a fever that climbed for 4 days without mercy. The surgeon said I would be dead before the week was out. He had the decency to say it quietly in the corridor, where he thought I could not hear him. He did not know I had slept lighter than a cat since Caldera. A man who has survived 3 cavalry engagements learns to hear everything. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had been riding too fast on purpose. Not to die, precisely. I am not a man who chooses the cliff's edge with intention. But I had not been taking any particular care to avoid it either, and there is a difference between those 2 things that I have spent the years since trying to explain to myself, with limited success. I was Crispin Aldermore, the Duke of Vanthorpe. I had been called the War Duke since I was 23, when I came home from the southern campaigns with a commission and a scar and very little else that resembled the young man who had left. I was feared in London, I knew it, I had cultivated it. Fear is a clean arrangement. It asks nothing of you. People step aside, keep their voices low, and do not ask you questions you have no wish to answer. I had my estates, my tenants, my duties, my silence. That was sufficient. That was, I believed, all I was capable of. Then my horse threw me on the Vanthorpe Ridge road on a wet October evening, and I was carried, insensible, to the nearest house that had a fire and a roof, which happened to be the home of Dr. Edmund Farish, country physician, and his daughter. Her name was Cecily. I did not know that for the first 2 days. I was not in a condition to know much of anything. There was pain, and then there was fever, and inside the fever there was the old noise, the percussion of cannon, the shrieking of horses, the smell of smoke baked into winter wool. I have been told I was not quiet during those days. I believe it. I surface from the fever in pieces, a cool cloth against the gash on my face, the smell of something green and sharp, some medicinal preparation. A voice, low and unhurried, that said nothing in particular but said it steadily, like a lamp left burning in a window. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. I opened my eyes to a low-ceilinged room with whitewashed walls and a single window that showed a pale October sky. A fire burned in the grate. My ribs had been bound, tightly, efficiently. My shoulder had been set. The gash on my face had been cleaned and dressed. I lay in a narrow bed that was not my own, under a wool blanket that was not mine, and I was alive, which I had not entirely expected. There was a woman sitting in the chair beside the bed, asleep. She was not young in the manner of a debutante at her first season. She was somewhere in her late 20s, perhaps, with dark hair pinned simply, and a face that was entirely without pretense. Not a beauty by the world's reckoning. The kind of woman you pass at a country assembly and do not remark on, because she is not dressed to be remarked on, and because the world has a narrow idea of what it means to be worth noticing. She wore a plain wool dress, dark blue, with no ornamentation. Her hands, folded in her lap even in sleep, were the hands of someone who worked. I watched her for a long moment. I could not explain then why I did not announce myself. Perhaps I was too tired. Perhaps I had been watched over for 3 days by someone who asked nothing in return, and I was not yet ready to end it. She woke on her own, tilting slightly forward in the chair the way a person wakes who has learned to sleep lightly. She looked at me without alarm. Her eyes were a very steady gray. "You're back," she said, and reached forward to press 2 fingers to my wrist. "So it appears." My voice came out rougher than I intended. 3 days of fever will do that. "Your pulse is steady. The fever has broken properly." She stood and moved to the washstand, poured water into a cup, and brought it to me. "Drink this slowly. Your ribs are bound. You will feel them if you try to sit up too quickly." I drank. She was right about the ribs. "Where am I?" "Farish House." 2 miles east of the Vanthorpe Ridge Road. She returned to the washstand. "Your horse came home without you. Your groom searched the road and found you at the base of the escarpment. You were brought here because my father's house was nearest." A pause. "I am Cecily Farish. My father is the physician." "And where is your father?" "Coniston, 15 miles north. There was a fever outbreak among the mill children. He left the morning after you were brought in." She turned back, and her expression was entirely matter-of-fact. He did what he could before he left and gave me his instructions. I have looked after his patients before. I looked at her steadily. You have been sitting with me. Someone had to. It was not said with any expectation of gratitude. It was simply the truth of the matter, stated plainly. I found I had nothing to say in response to it, which was unusual for me. I am not a man who is typically at a loss for words. I am simply a man who has found that words, on the whole, cost more than the return justifies. I am Crispin Aldermore, I said. I know who you are, Your Grace. Again, no particular tone, not awe, not studied disinterest, simply acknowledgement. You should rest. The fever breaking is a good sign, but you have not eaten in 3 days and your body has had a considerable shock. I will bring something. She brought soup, plain soup, clear broth with barley and bread that had been made that morning by the smell of it. She set it on the small table beside me and did not hover. She returned to her chair with a book, a medical text, I saw, though I could not make out the title, and read quietly while I ate. I had not, in recent memory, sat in a room with another person in such uncomplicated silence. In London, silence with me is a performance. People around me arrange their silences carefully, like furniture shifted to accommodate a difficult guest. They are quiet in ways that announce the effort it costs them. Cecily Farish was simply quiet. She was reading. I was eating. The fire burned. Rain began against the window. Your father's patients, I said when I had eaten as much as I could manage. Do you often see to them in his absence? She looked up from her book. When necessary. The parish is large and my father cannot always be in 2 places. I know his methods. I know his preparations. A small pause. Some of the village women prefer it, in fact. They find it easier to speak to another woman. And the men's? A faint flicker at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but its precursor. The men manage. They are generally too unwell to complain about who is giving them the willow bark. I was there for 2 weeks. My shoulder healed more quickly than the ribs. The ribs, as I said, had been problematic before the fall, a badly managed wound from Caldera that the London physicians had never quite set properly, and the new injury had compounded an old one. Cecily told me this on the 4th day, without euphemism. You have been riding hard on a chest that was not properly healed, she said, examining the binding with the same focused efficiency she brought to everything. The original wound site has some adhesion. It will be tender for some time. You should not ride or lift anything of weight for at least 3 weeks. That is inconvenient. Most things that are true are. She resecured the binding with practiced ease. You could send for your household. Your people must be wondering. My steward has been informed. He will manage. She did not press it. That was another thing about her. She did not press. She said what needed saying and then allowed it to stand without pursuit. I had grown so accustomed to the relentless social architecture of London, the angling, the inference, the careful positioning, that her straightforwardness felt at first like an absence. Then it began to feel like clean air. Her father returned on the 6th day, a compact and cheerful man in his 50s who seemed entirely unruffled to find a duke occupying his spare bedroom. He examined me, agreed with his daughter's treatment in every particular, and then went to his study, where I could hear him reviewing his notes from Caniston with the single-minded intensity of a man who genuinely loves his work. The apple, I thought, had not fallen far. Dr. Farish was pleasant company at dinner, when I was well enough to sit at the table, full of opinion on everything from the drainage problems in the eastern field to the proper management of a fever. He talked. His daughter ate her supper and occasionally corrected him on small points without malice and without deference, and he received the corrections happily. It was, I thought, a household of genuine mutual regard. I was not entirely sure I had seen one before. I watched her. I could not seem to stop. There was nothing theatrical about her. She did not arrange herself for effect. She moved through the house with the unhurried efficiency of someone who knows where everything is and what everything costs, and who finds no drama in the fact. When a tenant came to the door, a young farmhand with a badly infected hand, she dealt with it at the kitchen table with her father's lancet and her own steady nerve, speaking to the boy in a low and practical voice until the worst of it was over. When he had gone, pale and grateful, she washed her hands and went back to whatever she had been doing, and that was that. On the 8th evening, I found her in the small study at the back of the house, copying notes from one of her father's ledgers into a fresh one. The old ledger was falling apart at the spine. I stood in the doorway for a moment before she looked up. Your Grace, she set down her pen but did not rise, which I appreciated. I had been in enough rooms lately where people leapt to their feet. Can I get you anything? I only came to walk a little. The surgeon recommended movement. I looked at the ledgers. What are you doing? My father's patient records from the past 10 years. The old binding has given way and several pages are loose. I'm making a clean copy. She glanced at the pages spread before her. It matters that they're preserved. There are patterns in here which families carry, which complaints, which preparations have worked and which have not. My father sees these patterns intuitively. I prefer to have them written down. I came into the room, which was not large, and sat in the chair across from her. You did not train as a physician. Women don't. It was said with no particular bitterness, a statement of the world as it stood, not as she wished it were. But you have, in effect. She looked at me directly. She had that habit of looking at you directly without the careful management of gaze that well-bred women in society employed. Not boldly, simply honestly. I have learned what I've been able to learn. In this parish, that means something. In London, it would mean nothing at all. In London, very little that is real means anything at all, I said, which was more than I had intended to say. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is that why you were riding so fast? I had not expected the question. No one had asked me. My groom had not asked. My steward had not asked. The surgeon had certainly not asked. I looked at this woman in her plain wool dress in her father's small study, with her father's patient ledger open before her, and I found that I did not have a deflecting answer ready. I was not careful, I said at last. That is the honest answer. You are not obligated to tell me more than that. I know. I was quiet for a moment. The fire in the small grate ticked. I came home from the campaign 5 years ago and I have not managed the silence particularly well. London is not quiet. I fill the days, but the nights are. I stopped. She did not fill the silence. She simply waited with her pen set aside and her hands folded, attending, in the way that I had noticed was particular to her, not passive, but present. Fully present, in the way that very few people are. Loud, I said. The nights are loud with things that are over. She nodded once, as if this was not surprising or alarming, but simply a thing she had heard before and understood. I thought of the farmhand with the infected hand, the low voice until the worst of it was over. My father says the same of men who have been in great pain or great danger for a long time, she said, that the body and the mind take a great deal longer to leave than the man does, that the work of coming home is longer than anyone expects. Your father is wise. He is. I have stolen as much of his wisdom as he will let me. The faint edge of warmth again, almost a smile. He says I have long since taken everything he had, and would like it noted that he is the one with the title of physician. This time I laughed, which startled me. It came out quietly, but it was genuine. I could not remember the last time I had laughed in genuine company. She looked pleased in the way of someone who does not perform pleasure, but simply allows it. Then she looked back at her ledger and took up her pen, which was permission for me to go or to stay as I chose, without obligation either way. I stayed another hour. We talked about her father's methods, about the particular difficulties of a country practice, about a paper she had read in one of his journals regarding the management of inflammation. I know almost nothing about medicine. She did not condescend. She explained what she knew, and asked what I knew about the campaign surgeon's methods, which turned out to be more than I expected, and she listened to the answers with genuine attention. I walked back to my room that night with something in my chest that I had not felt in a long time, and could not name cleanly, a warmth, tentative and unfamiliar, like a fire built in a room that has been cold too long. I began, after that, to look for reasons to be in whatever room she was in. It is not a dignified admission for a man of my station, but it is the truth, and I have learned in the years since to prefer truth to dignity where the two are in conflict. She was in the kitchen most mornings, making preparations or reviewing her father's notes for the day's visits. I developed an interest in the kitchen, which had never previously occupied my attention. She walked the property in the afternoons, checking on the kitchen garden, visiting the elderly widow in the cottage at the lane's end who needed her liniment changed twice a week. I took my recommended daily walking in the same direction. She noticed this on the second afternoon and looked at me with an expression that was almost, not quite, amusement. The lane to Mrs. Hartwell's cottage is rather muddy, she said. For a gentleman's boots. I have other boots. Indeed, she walked on, but she did not send me back. We walked together 3 afternoons in a row. She talked as she walked, directly, without artifice, about whatever was before her mind. The widow's granddaughter who did not know how to manage the old woman's stubbornness. The drainage problem in the East Field, ignored for 3 years. The journal arguing a new theory about poverty and disease in mill towns. She had careful, specific opinions, grounded in observation, offered without any expectation that I would agree. On the 3rd afternoon, I found myself arguing with her about the journal's theory. Not because I was certain I was right, I was not, but because I wanted to know what she would say when I pushed back. She said I was conflating 2 things that needed to be kept separate, and she was right, and she said so without particular emphasis, as if being right was simply the ordinary outcome of thinking carefully. You should have been a physician, I said. I know, she said without self-pity, but I am not, and the work still wants doing so. I had been in her house 10 days when the visitors arrived. I should have expected it. My steward's communications had been insufficiently specific about my whereabouts. The visitors were 3. My cousin Harland, who had appointed himself my de facto guardian since Caldera. Harland's wife, who was kind in the manner of someone who has decided kindness is the most efficient policy. And Lady Eudora Pembram, daughter of the Earl of Ashwick, who had been presented to me as a possible match on 3 separate occasions, and who seemed to have absorbed the implication. They arrived on a Thursday morning. I heard the carriage from the upstairs room and came down to find them in the parlor, arranged as if for a portrait, and Cecily standing in the hallway with the expression of someone who has opened her door to a considerably larger situation than she anticipated. Harland shook my hand and told me I looked dreadful, which was his version of relief. Lady Eudora extended her hand with the measured warmth of someone who has practiced measured warmth in the mirror, and looked at Cecily not at all, in the specific manner of a person who has decided that someone else in the room does not require the expenditure of a look. Tea was produced by Cecily, who then withdrew because there was a patient coming, and because she was, in the precise calculation of London society, not a person whose presence at the tea table was required. I watched her go and felt something shift in me that I did not yet have the word for. Lady Eudora offered opinions about the countryside. Harland's wife said well-intentioned things about rest. All of it moved around me like water around a stone, and I sat by the parlor fire and thought about Cecily in the kitchen, her sleeves turned back, her attention complete. After half an hour, Harland took me aside, which in that small house meant the doorway, and told me, in the fond and managing tone he had been refining for 5 years, that Lady Eudora was a serious prospect. Sensible woman, good family, would be good for me. What I needed was to come back to London, re-enter the world, and stop rattling around the countryside alarming his groom. I didn't alarm the groom, I said. Crispin, he looked at me with the expression he reserved for conversations he considered important. You fell off a cliff. I fell down an escarpment. There is a difference. In terms of the family's collective anxiety, there is no difference at all. He paused. Lady Eudora is a perfectly good match. She would not trouble you. She knows the requirements of your position. I thought briefly about what it would mean to be with someone who would not trouble me. A woman whose primary qualification was that she would not ask questions I didn't want to answer. How long are you staying? I said. We had thought to take you back with us, as soon as you're well enough to travel. He looked at me carefully. The physician's daughter has done well by you, I can see that. I'll see to it she's properly compensated. The phrase landed with a particular flatness, properly compensated, as if the 2 weeks were a professional transaction cleanly bounded. She has been extraordinary, I said. Harland smiled. Quite, very capable woman by the look of her, remarkable really for her station. He patted my arm. Come and sit with Lady Eudora, she's made the effort to come all this way. I sat with Lady Eudora for a further hour. She was not unkind, she was not unintelligent. She talked about London, about the upcoming season, about a production she had seen at the theater that had apparently been very fine. She did not ask me anything about the campaign or the fall or the knights. She did not ask me anything, really, that had not already been asked and answered at some other gathering in some other drawing room. She was exactly what Harland had said she was, a perfectly good match, chosen with care, who would not trouble me. That evening after dinner, I went to find Cecily. She was in the study again at the ledger. The lamp was low. She looked up when I came in and then looked at me with the same steady gray gaze, and I understood that she had drawn her own conclusions about the afternoon and had let them settle without comment, because that was who she was. "They want to take me back to London," I said. "I know, you'll be well enough to travel in a few days." "Miss Farish," I sat down across from her as I had before, "I owe you a debt I am not sure I can discharge." "You owe me nothing," she said. "You were injured and you were here. Anyone in this house would have done the same." "No, they would not." I looked at her directly because she had earned that. "You sat with me for 4 days without sleeping properly. You talked me back through the worst of it without flinching, when a great many people with far more reason to think well of me would have flinched. I stopped and started again. "You asked me why I was writing so fast. No one has ever asked me that. No one has thought to." She was quiet. "And when I told you," I said, "you did not look at me with alarm or pity. You simply listened, as if what I'd said was something that could be held and then set down rather than something that had to be managed." Still quiet, the lamp between us. "In London," I said, "I am the War Duke. I am feared, or I am managed, or I am sought after for my title and my land. I have been all three. I have become very good at allowing all three because it requires nothing of me that I am not already doing." I paused. "You require something of me. You require me to actually be present, and I have discovered, somewhat to my own surprise, that I am capable of that, that I would like to be capable of that." Cecily set her pen down. "What are you saying, Your Grace?" "I am saying," I looked at my hands for a moment. They were steadier than I expected. "I am saying that I am not in the habit of knowing what I want. I have managed my life for 5 years on the principle that wanting things was an invitation to further loss, and that the correct position was to want as little as possible and control what I could. And then I fell off a horse and was brought to your father's house, and you sat beside me for 4 days and said nothing in particular but said it steadily, like a lamp in a window. And I have spent the past 10 days discovering that I want, very much, not to go back to what I was." She did not move for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, not cold, but careful. "You are recovered from a serious injury. You have been enclosed in a small house for 2 weeks with very limited company. That can make a person feel." "Cecily," it was the first time I had used her name, and it stopped her. "I am not a man who confuses proximity with feeling. I know the difference. I have spent 5 years keeping them at a distance from each other. What I am saying to you is that you are the most honest person I have met in 5 years of public life, and that I have not slept this well since before the campaign, and that I am afraid that when the carriage goes tomorrow and I am back in London, I will go back to not being present because you will not be there to require it." The lamp burned between us. Outside, the October wind had picked up. It moved in the trees beyond the window with that particular sound, the sound of everything letting go. She looked at me for a long time. I let her look. "I am a country physician's daughter," she said at last. "I have no connections, no fortune, no standing in the world your cousin inhabits. Lady Eudora Pembram was in your parlor this afternoon." "She was. And you are the Duke of Vanthorpe." "I am, much against my current inclination." That at last broke the almost smile into an actual one, brief, private, completely genuine. Then she looked down at the ledger and then back at me, and I could see her thinking, which was a thing she did visibly if you knew how to watch her. "I am not easily moved to things I haven't thought through," she said. "I would expect nothing less. You should know that I do not intend to become a different person for any reason. I would not want you to. And if I were to consider," she stopped and corrected herself, "if you were to ask my father." "I intend to ask your father at breakfast," I said. "I wanted to ask you first." She was still for a long moment. Then she nodded once, as she had nodded when I told her about the nights, as if what I had said was not surprising or alarming, but simply a thing she had heard and understood, and that she would turn over carefully and then, in her own time, answer plainly. "Ask him at breakfast," she said. "He will have opinions, he always has opinions." "I am aware. I find it one of the most restful things about this house." She smiled again, properly, fully, the kind of smile that changes a face entirely. I had not seen it before. I thought, sitting across from her in that small lamplit study with her father's ledgers spread between us and the October wind in the trees, that I would spend a considerable portion of whatever life remained to me in the project of seeing it again. I asked Dr. Farish at breakfast. He had opinions, as advertised. He asked me 3 questions that no one in London had ever asked me, and listened to the answers with the same focused attention his daughter brought to everything. He said that Cecily was not a woman to be entered into any arrangement that was not entirely her own choice, which I told him was already my understanding. He said that his daughter was the finest person of his acquaintance, which I said I agreed with entirely. He said that if I ever made her unhappy, I would hear about it from him, which I said was fair. Then he shook my hand and went to see to a patient. Harland was, as expected, a more complex negotiation. He made the case for Lady Eudora for London for the appropriate management of my position, all arguments I had heard in other forms, all with the quality of advice given to a man who has already decided. I let him finish. I told him I was grateful for his concern and that I had made my decision. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the doorway through which Cecily had moved, silent and efficient all morning. "She's not what anyone would have," he began. "No," I said, "she is not what anyone would have expected. That is rather the point." He left that afternoon, taking his wife and Lady Eudora with him. I had stopped caring what stories London told about me around the 4th day of fever, and I did not intend to start again. Cecily and I walked to Mrs. Hartwell's cottage that afternoon, as we had on 3 previous afternoons. The lane was muddy as it had been. We did not speak much. She changed the old woman's liniment with the same focused ease, and Mrs. Hartwell patted her hand and said she was a good girl, and Cecily said something quiet and kind and moved on. On the walk back, she took my arm, not with any ceremony, simply because the lane was uneven and my shoulder was still tender and it was practical. "You will not find London easy to come back from," she said. "No. This house is very small. I know. My father will talk constantly at meals. I am relying on it." She was quiet for a few steps. The trees along the lane had gone the deep copper and gold of late October, the leaves shifting in the afternoon light with that particular luxury of the season, the extravagance of a world preparing to let go. "I am glad your horse threw you," she said. "So am I said, deeply and sincerely." She laughed then, not the almost smile, not the private flicker, but a real laugh, warm and unguarded, and I held it in memory like the specific weight of a thing worth keeping. The lane was muddy, and the autumn was moving fast toward cold, and I was not the man I had been when I rode out on the Ridge Road 6 weeks ago, riding hard in the particular recklessness of a man who has not been careful because he has not seen the point. The point was here. It had been here the whole time, sitting in a chair beside me in a low-ceilinged room with whitewashed walls, saying nothing in particular but saying it steadily, like a lamp left burning in a window. We were married in the village church in December, on a morning when the ground was hard with frost, and the old stone of the church smelled of candle wax, and the particular cold of places that have held many lives. Dr. Farish stood beside his daughter and shook my hand at the door and said he was very glad, and Mrs. Hartwell was there, and 2 or 3 of Cecily's father's patients who had apparently decided they had some stake in the matter, and Harland, who had come around by then and who shook my hand without a word and looked, if I am being honest, rather moved. Cecily wore her best dress, which was not made of silk and did not have a train. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, directly, honestly, without arrangement, and said her words in a clear and steady voice, and I said mine, and that was that. I have been asked in the years since what changed. The polite version is that I recovered from an injury and gained a new perspective. The longer version is this. I had spent 5 years being feared, and managed and sought after for what I represented, arranged inside that life like a man in a winter coat. He cannot take off because the cold has been there so long he has forgotten warmth. And a woman in a plain wool dress in a small house on the East Road looked at me and saw not the Duke, not the War Duke, not the reputation or the scar, but simply a man who was very tired and had not been, in a long time, looked at without calculation. She looked at me. I found I could not look away. The wound the campaign left and the wound the fall left, she did not make them go away. I will not pretend she did, because she would correct me if I did, and she would be right. What she did was stay present with them, which is a different thing, and in some ways a more difficult one, And what the cold and the noise needed all along was not to be fixed, but to have someone sit beside them without flinching, until they learned to be quieter. I wake each morning now in a house that is not particularly quiet and not particularly grand, and the nights have less noise in them than they used to. And there is a woman beside me who still reads medical journals at breakfast and corrects me when I am wrong and laughs with the same warmth she has always had, and who, 30 years ago on an October evening, sat beside a stranger in a fever for 4 days and talked him back, simply and without drama, because someone had to, and she was there. She is the finest person I know. She has always been,